Welcome to Heretical Heathenry, where we explore the intersections of heathen practice, occultism, and philosophy. Today's episode is my first episode, and so it's a bit of an introduction. I'm new to this, so I want to thank any and all of you who managed to stick this through, and I promise to get better in the future. With that said, let's get to the first episode. Hello, and welcome to the Heretical Heathenry podcast. I'm the host, Robert Knox, and if you found your way here, chances are you've been exposed to the tides of heathenry. You're familiar with the non-stop arguments and constant purity testing, the battlefield filled with fluffy bunnies and tests from 23andMe. Well, I'm here to tell you there's another way. Actually, there are probably dozens of other ways, but this podcast is about mine, and maybe helping you find yours. So who am I, and why am I calling myself heretical? Before we tackle the heretical question, let's talk a bit about who I am. If you're a reader of my Substack, then you're probably aware that I'm an American. In my experience, most Americans don't know much about the outside world, including how our lines got here. Other than the occasional, your grandma was German, it's not something we discuss. When I was younger, it just wasn't an issue. As I got older, I started to wonder, who am I, and who are my people? Like everyone else in the 2010s, I spit in a tube and got my DNA tested. I found out that I'm German and Scandinavian. This was great, but I have no idea what that meant. What does it mean to be German? What are they like? This led naturally to exploring the culture, and then I got the bug. What were these people like before Christian colonization? I quickly found myself in Facebook groups and forums across the internet discussing Norse paganism. I bought myself a Poetic Edda, and the rest, as they say, is history. With that out of the way, why am I the heretical heathen? For those of you in the heathen sphere, I'm sure you, like me, have spent hours scrolling and reading about all these worthless arguments over universalism and folkism. You've seen the sides wage their little internet wars. You can probably even conjure up images in your head of the kinds of people in either camp. I've never felt at home in any of these camps. Universalism is boundless, and therefore has no definition by which to identify itself. Folkism can be too rigid, and has poor arguments that restrict it, and recons are basically LARPing. I'm someone who thinks standards matter, that history matters, that the structure of the cosmos matters, but I also think both universalist and folkish practitioners have gotten some fundamental things wrong about what those standards ought to be and where they come from. We should also be open to new developments. I myself have been attracted to the Western magical tradition, and I don't think my being a heathen conflicts with that. And so what am I to do? Well, for years I kept to myself. I did my bloat, and I made my sigils in the shadows. I didn't put myself out there. I didn't want to face the ire of the public. But that got tiring real quick. Now I write about my ideas over on Substack, also called the Heretical Heathen. And yes, you should check it out. It is my aim that this podcast is an extension of that project. So, what is heretical heathenry? I don't really know, and that's okay. This is an evolving project, swept up in the fires of becoming. What I do know is that I don't think heathenry should be a free-for-all where you can worship anything with a Norse name attached to it and call it a valid practice. Nor do I think we have to reconstruct exactly what the ancestors did and believe exactly what they believed. We are modern people with modern tools. For the Germanic fires to continue to burn brightly, we must be willing to adapt to modern times. Let me give you some examples of what I mean. From the Universalist side, I keep seeing this idea that there should be no gatekeeping whatsoever. Anyone can worship anything, including beings of chaos like the Jotun. They're just misunderstood. And look, I think that's dangerous, especially for people who are already struggling with mental health issues. Worshipping chaos invites chaos into your life. It's like inviting Grendel into the hall and being surprised when he starts eating your warriors. There's a reason our ancestors built these boundaries, made distinctions between the gods and giants, between order and chaos. Those weren't arbitrary cultural hang-ups. They reflected something real about how these forces operate in the world. From the folkish side, I hear this constant drumbeat that heathenry is the white man's religion, that you need the right bloodline, and that we have to do everything exactly as the ancestors did. This is ahistorical nonsense dressed up as tradition. Our ancestors were pragmatic, adaptive people who borrowed from their neighbors, changing their practices over time. They would probably be baffled by modern folkish reconstructionism. That said, there's no moral Norse pagan argument against ethnic governors. In fact, indigenous cultures keep their practices closed, and the arguments they employ can be used equally as well for heathenry. Heathenry is an ethnic tradition, not in the racial purity sense, but in the sense that it comes from specific peoples, specific cultures, and specific places. It has roots, and if we're going to say that Native American tribes can maintain closed practices because they were colonized and have a right to protect their traditions, then we need to extend that same logic to Germanic peoples who were also colonized by Rome, by Christianity, and by centuries of forced conversion and cultural erasure. I'm not saying that heathenry must be closed. I'm saying that communities should have the right to set their own boundaries if they choose to, and we should stop pretending that it's automatically racism. It's more complicated than that. Now, the ceremonial magical angle is probably going to confuse some people, and rightly so. How can one be concerned with tradition and boundaries while also working in a system that's clearly syncretic and modern? Here's the thing. The heathen Golden Dawn tradition isn't pretending to be an ancient practice. It's using the tools and structures developed by over a century of ceremonial magical developments. It borrows the discipline, the precision, the rituals, but populates them with heathen deities, runes, and Germanic cosmology instead of the Kabbalistic or Christian elements. It's a way of working with these forces that's rigorous and systematic, that takes both the practices and beings we work with seriously. And honestly, our ancestors would have been doing something similar if they had access to these frameworks. They weren't primitive or unsophisticated people. They were constantly adapting, learning, and incorporating new ideas into their way of life. The difference is I'm honest about what I'm doing, instead of pretending that it's an unbroken tradition going back in time forever. Unlike most people you meet in these spheres, I seem to constantly be growing. I'm pushing into new boundaries. I'm tackling my fears, including putting this out, which is terrifying, by the way. Terrific. I don't want to do it. So at the very least, the magic seems to be having a real effect on my life, and I'm going to keep pursuing that regardless of what any heathen has to tell me about it. So what can you expect from this podcast? Some episodes will be me solo, working through ideas, playing with philosophy, challenging assumptions, exploring specific practices or theological questions that I have. Other episodes may be interviews with people. Once I figure out how to do the whole audio bit of this, I'm sure by now it probably seems strange and robotic, but I'm going to work on it over time. I'm going to talk about things like, what does it actually mean to honor the ancestors when we disagree with them so much about so many topics? How do we distinguish between the gods and giants, and why does that matter? What does magical practice actually look like within a heathen framework? Can we develop new magical practices as modern heathens? Obviously, I think is yes. And I'm going to do it without the tribal loyalty tests. You don't have to agree with everything I say. In fact, I'd rather you didn't. It would be boring. If you want thinking, questioning, finding what actually works for you and what's actually true, not just picking a team and defending it against all comers, I hope this is the podcast for you. That said, I'm also a practicing magician and an all-around seeker. I'm interested in Greek philosophy and the Western magical tradition. Hell, I even adore modern UFO discourse. I don't intend to pin myself down to what's frankly becoming an oversaturated and boring heathenry niche. If I want to discuss UAPs or Plato's Republic, then I'm going to do it. If you're still with me, welcome. Whether you found me through my Substack or you're brand new to these ideas, I'm glad you're here either way. This is going to be a space for uncomfortable questions, for nuance, and for actually engaging these traditions and beings in ways that matter to us now, living today. Not just some books on the page of the Poetic Ed or the Heimskringla. You can find my writings on Substack at Heretical Heathenry, and you can find this podcast wherever you're listening to it now. I don't have a schedule yet. New episodes will be dropping whenever I feel like putting something out. I'm Robert Knox. This is Heretical Heathenry, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you for tuning in.